Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar on embracing Gen AI, the next frontier in SEO and content innovation. We're just going to give a few more seconds for people to join us, and then we'll get started. All right, thank you. Today I have Stephen Banbury, Head of Strategy with Expert Marketing Advisors, joining us. Stephen, do you want to go ahead and start it off?
Yeah, thanks, Brianne. Thanks for the introduction. And thanks to everyone for taking the time to join us today. And as Brianne mentioned, we're going to be exploring the intersection of SEO, content creation, and Gen AI. We'll be sharing some key considerations when it comes to content in the context of Gen AI and SEO, as well as share some, hopefully some key takeaways in order to keep you up to date in this really super fast evolving Gen AI era. I mean, if anyone's been paying attention to news over Thanksgiving, even with OpenAI, this is a very fast evolving space. And today, I'm delighted that joining me is David Smith, who is a seasoned SEO and digital marketing professional. Maybe, David, you could do a quick intro.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Yeah, it's very great to be here. Excited to talk about this topic. So yeah, my life has been spent in marketing and sales, and I'm a creative writer and painter, so I have a whole lot of that in my background. So these are really coming together nicely with the insurgence of content creation and artificial intelligence and all that. So it's kind of burgeoning into my wheelhouse, I guess. But yeah, marketing has been my forte for the last 30 years.
That's awesome. Thanks, David. So let me just go over the agenda quickly. So we'll do the introduction. I'll go through that. The rest you can read for yourselves. But essentially for the introduction, I'll do like a brief timeline for search engines and Gen AI, just to kind of set the scene a little bit. As you know, today, SEO is an integral part of a digital marketing strategy. And search itself has evolved from the early days of, crawler-based collection of text on the web, sorted by relevance, to now really complex algorithms that sense what the intent of searches is in an attempt to provide more information than just web content, web page content. Back in 1990, a postgraduate student at McGill University in Canada, a guy called Alan Emtage, wrote a FTP indexing tool named Archie, and it was a tool for indexing FTP archives, essentially allowing users to more easily identify specified files, and is essentially considered to be the first internet search engine ever. As you can see from the name Archie, it's based on archive. They just got rid of the V to make it a little more personable. And then when we move forward to, say, 1998, there were actually 80 million users back in 1998, with Alta Vista, Lycos, Yahoo really sort of taking up the lion's share. And as you can see, very early entrants to this, with both MSN, now Bing, and Google, actually just representing less than 1% of the market share, which is kind of crazy to think. And obviously that changed somewhat rapidly. And by the end of 2002, beginning of 2003, Google was in the pole position and hasn't moved from that position since. And as we all know, people stopped saying I've searched for things and started to say, I'm Googling, I've Googled it. And so this is what that market share looks like today. Today, Google has over 1 billion users, processes over 40,000 search queries per second, which is 3.5 billion searches per day, which is a ridiculous amount. And that's over 1.2 trillion a year. So as you can see, with some of those previous incumbents have disappeared completely, with Google really making up the lion's share, not just on web, on your desktop, but also in the mobile search as well. So David, maybe you could talk a little bit about this next timeline.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So, I mean, because of the recent surgence of, news articles and popularity with ChatGPT and Claude and all that, it seems like this thing's just hit us really fast and hard in the last, few years. But obviously, over the last couple decades, where we have seen a lot of growth in generative AI, things that we wouldn't have necessarily called it back then, but that's really what it was back in even AOL Instant Messenger, utilizing what at the time was called Smart Child, which is basically a something you can add on as like a rider to your instant messenger, and it allowed you to look up sports scores and get stock quotes and things like that. But it was really what didn't have the staying power. It was more just kind of a fancy thing to have on your computer. But that grew into eventually when we saw in the early 2010s and 2013, 14, Siri and Alexa and Cortana and Google Assistant and all that really started to become something where a user is interacting with a device, with a computer, and it's really providing help, and it's providing some context between it and the user, and it becomes, very fluid. And then obviously, we hit, a couple years ago, ChatGPT, OpenAI, and all that has just grown. And like with a lot of artificial intelligence and computers, things happen exponentially. They develop and build quickly on top of one another. But truly, the history of it goes way back. I mean, decades before, even into like the 40s and 50s, when Alan Turing was just talking about the idea of, can computers be intelligent? Can it process and understand? And back to his imitation game or Turing test, trying to determine whether can a computer outwit a human person? Watching it come up with responses, and it was a really neat test. They'd actually have a person watching, a computer responding, and a human responding at the same time, and that watcher was trying to determine which was authentic, which was it the computer bringing back the answer, or was it the actual human participant? And that test would say if the computer passed, then it started to show the ability to comprehend communication between itself and a human participant. Pretty cool. But even in, like, I think the 1960s, there was Eliza, which I think was it was a script ran that basically had almost like a doctor in a psychiatric setting. The participant would make a comment or suggest an idea, and what Eliza would do is it would take that and just kind of repurpose it and push back that statement into a question form, kind of like a good psychologist might do, helping you understand your feelings, right? So it was a cool tool, but it just began to show us there was an opportunity here. But again, this is just in the 60s. How can we utilize the processing of an input from a person into a computer, and it can extract information and deliver a response back? So we had seen that really early on. I even think back to, as a kid watching the Jetsons, Rosie and George communicating. It's like, wow, this is our future, right? So, and which is kind of interesting. Little fact, the Jetsons were set to be like, in a way, like 2060s, 2070s is kind of the timeline that the Jetsons were supposedly uh, happening. So it's kind of neat. We're getting closer to those things. But the 70s, 80s didn't have a ton of great growth with AI, but we really saw more in the early 2000s. And I think that's where it's all really taking place. But I think with science fiction and writings and stuff, people have always thought, can computer intelligence match human intelligence? And I think we're starting to see, the way it can push itself into that arena. But I think we're still a long way away from some of the things that Alan Turing thought might happen.
It's interesting when you look at that timeline and then you look at like this timeline in terms of that speed of adoption. So, from Turing to, conversations around artificial general intelligence that are sort of coming up. You look at the speed of adoption, just that rate of change is just exponential. So when you think about getting to 100 million users for Spotify, which was, like 4 years plus, in less than 2 months, you've had that for ChatGPT for OpenAI. And in fact, they launched literally a year ago to today. I mean, they launched, I think it was the 30th of November, 2022. Just a quick chart, just in that vein, when you think about the AI market map, this was Sonia Hung from Sequoia Capital. I mean, there wasn't a tiny amount back in 2022, but you can see just that increase just in the app market. This is doesn't even include things like infrastructure and some of the other tools that support it. And as we know, the investment in this is absolutely huge. And when you think about recent announcements about your ability to create your own GPTs and perhaps even a marketplace and app store for those, this is just gonna just explode massively. And so, setting kind of some of the background for some of this, one of the quotes that I read that actually Paul Rotzer came up with, this was something actually that came from a doctor who was talking about radiologists. And he was saying that AI won't replace radiologists, but radiologists who use AI will replace those that don't. And Paul views marketers here, and I think there's many functions you could put in this. But I see marketing and AI in this particular instance as very much a dynamic duo, and ways in which you can come together and actually use it as a tool to augment your skills and actually even do a better job more efficiently and at scale versus replacing. But actually starting to use those tools, super important. And we'll move on. But before we get to the next slide, any thoughts on this, David?
I love the quote, and I love the fact that you're right. It's something you can even easily replace anything in there, and achieve the same idea behind the quote. But yeah, truly, when we look at this as a tool that's available to us to use, I love the word augment. We're still in charge. We still have to decide to use it. Like maybe a rock pounding in a spike compared to a hammer. Having something more agile and more has more of a finite precision to it. Um, I see this as a tool, and I do understand it, and I really appreciate this comment because it is true. Those who use tools properly will always outmatch those who don't. I think there should be some caution placed around any adoption of any tool, but certainly, yeah, that says a lot to how we should approach this with excitement and not so much with fear.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, with that as a kind of a background, then I'll hand it over to David to talk about, why SEO is so critical for business today.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Yeah, so this is a great slide here. Imagine 50% of the folks that are online doing searches are arriving at those sites they're searching for organically, which means they're just putting a query in. They have a pain point, they have some friction, a problem, a solution they're looking for, and they're going about that like any of us would, saying, "Hey, I need help." And those searches are, what we call organic, and they make up more than half of the searchers online, which means that's super valuable to understand. And as you go into the next slide and we start talking about where SEO and organic come together, and that's really the crust here, is because that is what SEO does. Our idea of organic SEO is to get folks to the site organically, meaning they're finding them through their own drilling down and learning about what they're searching for. So our 3 points here, yeah, again, 50% of traffic is getting to the sites organically via SEO. SEO has an amazing point to leverage for conversion of those folks that land at the site. When you think about typical cold calling or outbound efforts returning less than 2%. Looking at this quote here, over almost 15% conversion rate. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that the searcher initiated that search, and they have a problem that they need to solve. And so that's an investment, right? They've already put time into it. They're suffering from whatever that is. So when they go searching for it, they are actively pursuing a solution. And anytime you have sales come together with someone who's anxious and ready to buy, you're going to have better conversion, most certainly. And then we look back to the idea that this is an organic search. again, wow, SEO and organic search and that type of return shows the effectiveness of what SEO brings. And then thinking about, effectiveness and return on investment, because it's, money is spent initially on the strategy and the creation of content that will then build out the site and the pages. It's not a pay-per-click model. So folks that are arriving to you organically are not doing that, are not getting there, and you're not paying for their arrival. They're getting to there because you provided content that matches their query, and that's free and it's sustainable. As it builds and the site gets stronger through those SEO efforts, it remains that way. And I think that what makes SEO such a strong, investment from an ROI standpoint. Um, yeah, and this next slide is great too. Again, imagine um, when folks get to when they found a reason to land on your site, it's because they probably found you in that first page. And if 75% of users don't go beyond that page one or those top 10, that tells you something. And it tells you that what they're being delivered, they're perceiving as valuable, and they see it as answering to the query that they have. And so the only way to get yourself there, or maybe get yourself to that spot, is good quality content. And that's what SEO's aim is, to deliver not only well-rounded content, but authoritative content, but user engaged content, stuff that'll keep folks on the page and enjoying what they're reading. So, um, so I guess that's probably the long-term growth. Again, as we spoke about, it does help folks stay on the page and help build out authority of the site. And then, not, of course, nothing goes beyond the idea that when someone grabs their smartphone and does that search, over 75% of those folks looking for a local solution end up at that business or on their website that day with almost a 30% sale rate, which that's incredible. So the idea of SEO for business across all six of these points, and the last one being one that's really untapped in a lot of ways. Folks don't realize how important that local strategic SEO is going to be, because if 75% of folks are searching on their phone right now, Stephen, that's just going up. And pretty soon it's going to be 90%, 95%. And the numbers just get better for businesses who are properly leveraging local SEO in their efforts.
Yeah, the sort of the business listings, the B2B side of that is, as it relates to local, is super important because, certainly when I'm doing a mobile search, it's, is there a restaurant near me? Is there a doctor near me? It's proximity to where you are with that search is, and so that's incredibly important.
Yeah.
And to your point, kind of often overlooked when you're thinking about your SEO strategy and content that's going to drive that. So yeah, really, really interesting. As we get into essentially the fundamental role of content, maybe David, when we go, you could talk about how you're really leveraging Gen AI for content, really at scale, I guess. So let me hit you with this quote. I mean, certainly when I search, unless I'm doing like very deep research, I'm really not looking past the first stage. And in fact, my intent as a marketing professional is to always increase and improve our rankings so we are on the first page. So this really resonates with me.
Yeah, it kind of makes me want to ask the question, like the chicken or egg question. Are folks not going on to those additional pages out of laziness, or are they landing there trusting what they see? And if they're trusting what they see, what came first? Was it the brand marketing, or was it the trustworthiness that Google has placed, into that site to catapult them up to the front page or the top page? But I think the answer is really it's both. Like the fact that folks aren't leaving those top, maybe 1 to 10, aren't looking any further, is because they do trust what they're seeing is authoritative and trustworthy, and that they can find what they're looking for right there. And so if you know that the opportunity to be ranked at 15 or 20 is a good thing, you probably have to wonder, and it really isn't, because people aren't going to see you. They're not going to make it to your site. I generally, as a consumer, know that when I'm on that first page, I'm finding the things that I need. Now, some users might drift beyond. That's why we have, a quarter of them still doing that. But, ultimately, it's good quality content, relevant content that is elevated by our search engines, and that's what people are finding. And again, they wouldn't be there if that content wasn't relevant and wasn't authoritative. And then it makes you able to trust that even more.
Mm. So maybe you could walk us through some of these points that you put up, David, around facilitating ideas and really utilizing this new technology to.
Sure. So it goes back to the importance of content and SEO. I mean, quite honestly, there are a lot of phrases about this, but I mean, content truly is everything. You're trying to deliver to that searcher what they need, but the content needs to echo the voice that they're using in their search to find you. So it's important that the content is relevant, it's useful. Um, you know, uh, Larry and Sergey went off with the idea that Google, they wanted it to be helpful, relevant, and useful information right from the beginning. And I think that's obviously still true today. So as we think about content and the role of content in SEO, it does tell me, it's got to be good. It's got to be thought provoking. It's got to cover all the bases. Like it's one thing to have a page on a particular piece of maybe your product or service, outlining what it does, how it solves that problem. But it's not that single page that's going to give you relevance in your search results. It's going to be all the surrounding pages, all the surrounding articles, all the different assets that you create to support your knowledge. Because, one particular topic or keyword might get a searcher there, right? But to show the search bots that your site really is the authoritative source on this one particular domain, you have to build out loads of content. So it's not just a hierarchy of one good keyword, but it's all the keywords underneath that keyword that these search engines want to see that you are talking about those items. So that's all content, and you have to keep building that content out. And so as we kind of see the through line between what gets folks via search to your site, that content is everything, and keeping them on the site, keeping them engaged. So we think about like, how do we use this generative AI tool to help us, right? And I think that's where our slide right here talks about, using a generative AI tool is great, and I think from a scale standpoint, the facilitation of new ideas, it's wonderful. But there are a lot of these things that we have to keep remembering. You need to have human oversight. Someone has to be in the trenches looking at what's being created, because ultimately it's a person who understands their product, and that same idea, that marketer understands the user. And there's so much intricacy and so much nuance to it that if we rely on content that's been created by AI, the bar is becoming to be set very low. And so when we look at this right here, the idea of content, the idea of content is supposed to satisfy informational needs, and that's only going to come from a skilled writer. Looking at, again, the content's being given and how does it reflect against how that searcher is looking. So we kind of use some of these to help us every day as we use these tools, because obviously we are trying to be on the front end of utilizing AI content, creative tools. But we have a staff of 10 or so writers that we have invested in and trust that they are the authority. They know how to communicate. But we look at this tool as an opportunity to generate new ideas, to analyze data, and to find maybe certain areas that needs to be elevated in the content. So I think that's where our real tool chest is at. But anytime you do use it, you got to be cautious. You need to have a human involved, because again, like our third point, we have to prioritize the readability of that content, and that's where I think we start to see a lot of holes in what's generated from like a AI standpoint. It's missing some of those contextual feelings that a human has written, and I think you can see through it pretty sure. I'm sure, Stephen, you've seen stuff that it's been clearly generated by AI, and it is kind of flat. It's kind of dull and lifeless. And I think to use this tool effectively, you got to have people, again, in the trenches, monitoring how it's coming out, making sure it's aligning up with the intent of both the searcher and the product that searcher is looking for.
Yeah, it's an incredibly useful tool, but sometimes it lacks a little authenticity in terms of like the emotion you don't get,
Yeah.
or the lack of specificity that you sometimes get and
Yeah.
value. I mean, a lot of it comes down to the questions you're asking and trying to generate responses, but no, that's exactly right. And so, as we think about the future of SEO with Gen AI, you know, um, talking about really the necessity for SEO professionals to adapt to these AI advances, and
Uh-huh.
how they can incorporate these tools. Maybe there's a framework or like key takeaways, David, that you can share in the next couple of slides. I know this quote from HubSpot kind of stood out to me in terms of differentiation, driving
Well, I
people.
think it's a great quote. And if we could remember too, like the resource that these generative AI tools are using is really, if you think about it, it's a bucket of information. It's the internet, right? So its only ability is to resource or pull from that archive, right? So it has an incredible ability to go through massive amounts of data, right? And it's getting better and better at curating that data into a discernible sentence or paragraph, right? But ultimately, it's only pulling from data that exists. Well, that's not creativity, right? I mean, creativity is someone who merges, several different colors together as a painter and creates this new, not a new color, but this blended version of a color. That's creative. Someone who just pulls from the bucket all the time, and you're going to get the same results. So I think what was being mentioned here is that like to elevate as content starts to get watered down by some of this generative AI. It's going to again need that human touch because we can manage creativity pretty well with empathy and understanding. These are things that can never be pulled out of content creation, and even in general. I think that's just the basis for how human involvement in this is critical, because we can't replicate that. You can't replicate the understanding that a human has, that a person has, the empathy that they could show, and I think that's again. I think it's a great quote to be hitting those new things. You need to be authentic and creative for sure.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is, you have those large language models, but to underscoring your point around, it's just pulling on content that already exists and content that's being added, right? Especially if you have the ability to, you know, go search the web through a Bing, right, as a chat GPT does. So, but at the end of the day, it's still pulling pulling
Yeah.
resources. So yeah. Any of
So
the
looking.
Yeah.
Oh, please go ahead.
No, I was going to say, as you think about sort of key takeaways, you know, these are all super important. Where would you start? Or do these are all things you really have to be cognizant of?
Well, I think the most important thing is you always got to remember the reader. You got to be thinking. It's like like the last one probably is the most one, is the most important one. Focusing on the value. Got to continue to create, genuinely good content for the users. So knowing your target audience and understanding the trends that are happening. I think that's the most important point. Like when you think about content, always think, is this valuable? Am I providing an answer, a solution, a service, a product to that person who's looking for it? So when you think about that, that means we are going to be in this, working it together. So, but yeah, these other points are great. Staying abreast of developments in AI and understanding how they're affecting, like how we strategize our SEO efforts. So certainly that's a great one. I think the balance of AI and human oversight, of course, that can't be underestimated. I think that has to be 80-20. We have to stay involved. Um, one of the things early on, you heard a lot of people talk about, Google and search engines are going to start penalizing folks who use content created by AI. And I just don't think that's going to be the case. I don't think it's going to be a penalty for using it because ultimately I believe that they still want good content. So if it's AI assisted and there's still good quality content there, it is not going to be marked as bad. It's not going to be looked at as poor. Content that will get looked at as bad and currently is still getting looked at as bad is duplicate content. It's old pieces of content that have been retread to kind of put a fresh face on it, but no real effort was taken to make it more valuable for today. So, keeping content green, keeping it fresh, I think that's the most important. And again, AI and these tools will help do some of that, but ultimately that human involvement and keeping it weighted and helping folks understand what the solution you're presenting really is doing for them is going to be so key.
Yeah, I love that last point. I know we're so coming up to actually on the half hour. One question that I had come in just while you're still going to the QA slide, I can ask on this slide is, you talk about staying informed.
Yeah.
How should people, what resources, how should people think about that? Where can they go? Where are you going to stay updated and informed? I know I go to the AI Marketing Institute, for example. I'm
Yeah.
following thought leaders on, X, formerly known as Twitter. I'm in Threads, which is great. Kara Swisher and team are all over that. So how about yourself? What guidance would you give to people?
Well, I mean, I love the idea that, and speaking to the idea that Google and what's delivered to us daily in our feeds tend to hover around the things that we're searching for. And as soon as I, started to dive into this, the more research I did, the more articles and the more prompts I was given to, check out this article, look at that. But those same sources that you mentioned are great. I think the idea is just, always be current, watch trends, watch news articles, watch what the news is saying. But more importantly, there are resources out there that really deliver, from Gartner to others like that. You're going to find a lot of great information, but I think the real key is be diligent and be vigilant in what you're doing, because some of these things are going to shift. Algorithms are going to change. Things might at one point be working well with some of this AI assisted content, and maybe sometimes it won't. So just staying abreast, again, being vigilant. Um, you know, I love the idea of peer review, making sure that we're constantly bouncing ideas off of each other and finding out what others are thinking and where they're finding their, the best nuggets for us to learn from.
Yeah, I mean, I put this slide up just well, to thank everyone for coming today, and David especially for your insights around this. And email addresses are here. So if you do have questions, please feel free to reach out to David or myself directly, and we'll definitely take the time to get back to you. But thank you so much, David, for your time today, and thank you for everyone for joining us. It's been super interesting. Really appreciate it. Thank you.